Hey folks, Dust here, and I got a video for you today I didn't think I was going to be making. So originally I was going to do a video on Vitality, which I still will and release at some point here soon. But we got hit with the big move today, and I have to talk about it. It's of course NRG in shocking fashion, benching their in-game leader daps in the middle of a very busy tournament schedule, which is not over for them yet. And instead they've brought in Stanislaw as the new in-game leader. And if this sounds familiar, it's because it's very similar to a situation that happened with daps and Stanislaw over on Optic a few years ago, which funnily enough is happening right after that whole eavesdrop podcast that they did with Hex, which was of course like daps, Naf, Rush, and Tarek were on that podcast, and that was like recorded during DreamHack Masters Dallas, which is the tournament they just came from, earlier in May. And then obviously the most recent was ECS Season 7 Finals, which just took place. So it's all real crazy storylines and timing behind this whole move. And in fact, DK put out a tweet after the move got announced where apparently this move only got decided on within the last couple of days. Now, personally, when I saw that Stanislaw was kind of removing himself from the starting lineup of Complexity in favor of them bringing in the young player Oboe and then having Def move to the in-game leader spot, I was a little bit fearful that the writing was on the wall, that perhaps maybe Stanislaw would find his way onto NRG. I even almost tweeted it like, oh no, is this what's gonna happen? But I thought surely not with the level of performance NRG have been giving us lately, and not with the timing of how busy their tournament schedule is. And before I get into NRG's performance lately and kind of some of the pros and cons of the team and trying to assess this move, I do just need to highlight how busy their tournament schedule really has been. Because the thing is Tarek has only been a part of this team when it comes to LAN play for less than 3 months. His debut event was the Starlight of Season 7 Finals, which started at the very end of March and bled into the very beginning of April, and that was a top 4 finish for the team. And then they essentially went straight into the EPL Season 9 group stage right after that. I think there was a brief break between when they won that group and when they went into IEM Sydney. But then from IEM Sydney forward, they have been virtually nonstop on the road, particularly these last 3 events they played, right? I mean, they played CS Summit, DreamHack Masters Dallas, and the ECS Season 7 Finals back to back to back. And they're not done yet, by the way, because basically a week after they've made this move and I've published this video, they're going to be going to the EPL Finals. And then directly after that, they're going to be going to ESL1 Cologne. And then directly after that, they're going to be going over to Blast Los Angeles. So they are in the middle of a very crazy schedule. They did not have a whole lot of time to try to make any drastic changes or improvements, essentially from IEM Sydney forward back in April, and they're really not going to have much time to implement Stanislaw as an in-game leader and him really inflict any real change on this team, because he'll really have only been on the team for a week before they go to the EPL Finals. And then again, it's straight to Cologne and straight to Los Angeles afterwards. There's very little time when you consider for travel days to really get much practice in, other than the practice you might get between matches at events, or if you take an early exit at an event, maybe you get some extra days while you're there to try to do some practice. But yeah, it makes things really difficult for the team and for the players, and for us to really draw any conclusions, because we're not really gonna have Stanislaw having a fair crack at the team when he first joins, to be honest. And honestly, I don't even think that daps and maybe even the coaching staff had a whole lot of time to make too many adjustments between tournaments to try to help the team out. So it's definitely a crazy case of timing when it comes to this move. And now let's get on to the performance of this team, because if we're honest, since Tarek has joined here in April, the results have not been that bad. I mean, I know right before he joined the team, their last event with Fugly, they had a little bit of a rough ride at Katowice, pretty much getting knocked out of Legend stage very rapidly. That was, of course, after they had just won the minor. They also went out in the group stages at the EPL Season 8 Finals, losing to Made in Brazil and Ghost in very disappointing fashion. And then before that, you go on to the end of last year where they had some group stage exits at Chicago, which was very disappointing, in the ECS Season 6 Finals, which was also quite disappointing. They did have kind of a cool event where they took second at that Supernova Malta event, losing to Liquid in the finals. That was okay. They had won CS Summit 3, had some pretty decent wins at that event as well, had some top 4 finishes at Starlighter Season 6 and ESO1 New York. So they were doing decent, but yeah, sure, they had hit a bit of a plateau. But then they bring Tarek on board, and so far so good, right? I mean, their debut event, they get a top 4 finish at Starlighter Season 7. This was, of course, a best of 3 Swiss system, so a very grueling tournament format. They got out of that with wins over North, Made in Brazil, and Big, and then they beat Vitality and then lost to Fnatic in the semifinals, both maps going into overtime. So a pretty solid debut. They then took care of business at EPL, topping their group to make sure that they're going to have a spot at the finals, which is coming up soon. At Sydney, they take a top 4, losing to Fnatic in a best of 3 that was a 1-2 series. They had beaten FaZe and Made in Brazil earlier in the tournament. So not a bad shot at Sydney. Then they go to CS Summit 4, where again they get a top 4 finish. They are able to get through the group stages just fine. They were able to beat Renegades. They split maps with Ents. They beat Ghost, and they split maps with Liquid. And they only really lost an actual complete best of 2 to Vitality, and then they lose to Team Liquid in the semis 0-2. Then they go to DreamHack Masters Dallas, and this was indeed a pretty disappointing finish. They went out in groups pretty early. They got knocked down to the lower bracket right away from Furia. They wound up beating a really weak Cloud9 team and then lost to G2 in a 1-2 series. Though G2 has been looking stronger lately, it's not an embarrassing loss, but certainly not where NRG wanted to be. I will admit that was probably a tough pill for them to swallow, and maybe what started predicating some ideas of maybe making a move. Though, when you consider the fact that you've had top 4 finishes every tournament outside of DreamHack Masters Dallas, still no need to hit a panic button just yet. Again, especially considering that Tarek's only been on the team for a couple of months. You haven't had a lot of time to implement any real changes because you're on a busy tournament schedule. So all things seem fine. And then, yeah, this ECS Season 7 finals, they actually beat NIP. They beat Furia, got a little bit of revenge, and then they went and lost to Vitality, the eventual champions of the tournament. And one of their losses in that 0-2 series was an overtime loss in Overpass. So, I mean, again, when you look at the actual tournament results here for NRG, they weren't necessarily bad. And when I consider the issue of timing and time for practice and time for change, I mean, man, like, it just, the timing seems really, really off for this move. I mean, I think you should have kept daps at least through Blast Los Angeles. I mean, I guess they want to make the change now before this next major cycle to try to give some time maybe to Stanislaw after they get through these last few tournaments to have some practice and make some changes and try to make them stronger for the major. Maybe you could look at it that way. There's also always the concept of it's always better to make a move too early than too late when it comes to trying to improve a lineup for their tournament future. But again, their performances seem pretty good. Their results seem fine. I mean, yeah, there was a couple disappointing losses, I guess. Like I said, the Dallas result certainly was a very disappointing one. Other than that, though, there really wasn't too many results where I was like, yeah, NRG really dropped the ball here. Not since Tarek was on board, at least. Not these last, 4 or 5 tournaments they've played. So that's what makes it a little bit crazy. Now, I will say that their map pools did have some issues. It wasn't really strongly formed just yet. I mean, they certainly had Train down. They were really, really dominant on Train. They could play Mirage quite well. Their Dust 2 was something they seemed to be working on. It was a map that they didn't really play that much in the past, but they seem to have been working on it. They even had a win over Team Liquid. So it seemed like their Dust 2 was coming around to go alongside their Train, their Mirage, and their Nuke was pretty good. I mean, they had some wins against some good teams like Furia, and their losses were a double overtime loss to Vitality and an overtime loss to Fnatic. So their Nuke also seemed to be pretty good. It wasn't super strong like their Train, but it seemed okay. And again, their Dust 2 seem to be coming around. They seem to have Mirage. They seem to have Train. Really, their glaring weaknesses, of course, with the fact that they were really, really poor on Inferno. Their Overpass wasn't that great, and we didn't really know what their Vertigo was going to be. So there was definitely some gaps there, but they had 2 to 3 maps they were really strong on, a 4th map that they were pretty good on, and even their Overpass, which is one of their weaker maps next to Inferno, I mean, the bulk of their losses were to really, really good Overpass teams, like a Vitality and a Team Liquid. They did have a win over Ents, and they did have a win over Vitality earlier in the year, so I don't know if their Overpass was actually as bad as the numbers indicate when you consider who they lost to and who they've beaten, but yeah, sure, their map pool did need some work, and again, with the issue of the busy tournament schedule, not sure how they were going to patch that up. When it came to player performances, I mean, Breezy's been an absolute fucking stud. I think he's the best entry fragger not on Team Liquid right now in the North American region. He is really, really good in that role of being an aggressive rifler, helping create openings, or being a trade fragger to help, secure sites or secure map control. Just really, really strong rifler. Has been great. I mean, I feel like he's often overlooked because of how much talent is on Team Liquid and how much those players get praised, but Breezy, man, absolute fucking unit. And then you had Ethan, who is a pretty damn good rifler, been playing really, really well ever since he joined NRG. I guess his last couple events haven't been as strong as maybe some of his events earlier in 2019 and into late 2018. So there was a little bit of a dip, but there's also a new player coming in. There's maybe some role swapping around. So not sure how much that factored in, but he was still playing pretty good. Cirque was still playing pretty good. I guess there were certainly sometimes games he could go missing, but overall he still played pretty well. So they still had a pretty good base of firepower. Then you brought on Tarek, and look, Tarek did have a couple of off events here for sure. That is certain. And I do wonder a bit if this is what predicates the move, is the fact that Tarek was not seemingly as comfortable. And I think it is because they didn't do a great job implementing him onto the team, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And then, yeah, as far as that's the one being replaced, yeah, his individual play was not that great. He could certainly have games where he was good, but yeah, overall, it wasn't that strong. And The thing is, though, did he really need to be? Is the point. Like, I still felt he added a lot of value as an actual strat caller in the fact that he had guys like Tarek, like Cirque, like Breeze, like Ethan. You should have enough firepower, even if daps isn't necessarily playing up to par, to be a pretty good team, right? I mean, yeah, certainly there's some kind of freak differences out there when you have a team like Team Liquid that has 5 super skilled players, when you have a team like Astralis who, when they weren't busy taking breaks, when they were actually, on point and playing regularly, they had 5 players who all could contribute pretty well. And there's certainly a couple other teams you could point to that has a lot of fragging, but still, NRG with 4 really strong players should have not necessarily felt like daps was too much of a burden just because he wasn't necessarily always individually putting up big stats. So there's that aspect of it, the actual player performance and tournament results. But if we're looking at actually how the team was operating, it did feel like a lot of their T sides were essentially Tarek taking up Fugly spots. Now, they did change up their style a bit. They got, somewhat away from just playing standard default and mid-round protocols. They actually did get a lot more into doing faster pace executes and throwing in these faster set pieces and playing a little bit more scrappy and just playing a little bit more aggressive and at times favoring some of the 1-4 and fast 2-3 splits, like on a map like Mirage, which they played a lot alongside Train. It was their most played map. They were drifting away from just like the default mid control into mid to late round set pieces and more into the faster opening splits. And so it felt like they were tinkering their style of play for one to be more dynamic, because right now in the current meta, you have to kind of be capable of, having a really strong foundational play and having a good default, having set roles and having all your protocols, but you also need to be able to play fast paced and scrappy and be able to mix in executes and change the pace and keep your opponent guessing. Most of the best teams in the world right now are complete teams. They have a good mixture of play. They're not a specialist where they only focus on default, or they only focus on set pieces, or they only focus on being loose and scrappy. When you look at a team like Liquid, like an Ents, like an Astralis, these are the teams that were capable of playing the full spectrum of CS when it came to T-side tactics. And it seemed like NRG was somewhat moving in that direction, but it did also make you wonder if a lot of the reason why they were increasing the pacing of their play more often was because they had Tarek kind of just filling a lot of fugly spots. It's not really the best way to use him. The best way to get him involved isn't in a more aggressive fashion. And because you already had someone like Breezy, who is an entry fragger, you already had Ethan, who on several maps like to be more in the entry mix as opposed to the edge of the map, though that is certainly different on other maps like Overpass, for instance, where he played outside B. But then you had daps, who was seemingly always going to be with the control group. That seemed to be kind of what he likes to do. And a lot of in-game leaders are doing that nowadays. You hardly ever have a lot of in-game leaders playing the edge of the map. That's very rare these days. Then, of course, Cirque, being the primary opper, was, of course, someone who was going to be a part of the main control group. It's kind of the term that we use for the 3 players that typically are going to be packing together to get mid-control or emphasize a certain bomb site they're trying to enter into in the early part, where you have kind of your 2 solo players. Sometimes you only have like 1 solo player depending on the map, but yeah, it did seem like Tarek was kind of thrown in a lot of Fugly's old spots. It's probably not the best way to use him. And so this is where Stanislaw coming into play could maybe be helpful, because here's 2 things that Stanislaw can do right away that may make things better for NRG. And I say may because who knows? I think NRG were already on the right track, and this could certainly screw things up. So first off, what Stanislaw can do is he can play those solo, edge of the map roles if you want him to. He's a very flexible rifler. He's able to help with entry work if you want him to. He certainly could just fill in daps' spots and play with Breeze and kind of be that entry duo and create openings. He certainly is capable of that. But what he can also do is play the edges of the map, and he can have Tarek with Breeze as kind of an entry duo. Maybe in certain maps, Ethan's going to be in the mix as well, depending on the situations. And then, of course, you're going to have Cirque opping. So that's one thing that could maybe help Tarek get into roles he's more comfortable with, where he can be more impactful and actually put up numbers and maybe make things kosher as far as the roles go for the entire team and make things gel together better. That is one thing Stanislaw might be able to do. Second thing Stanislaw is going to be able to do is he is a better fragger than daps. He's a more skilled player than daps. So certainly he could add to the overall firepower of the team. I mean, those are the 2 biggest things that if you think this move is going to be a good one, that's probably the 2 areas where it's going to have the most positive impact. The negative impact, though, is how's the style of calling going to change? How are the other players going to respond to that? Are they going to deteriorate because they're under a new system if indeed Stanislaw makes drastic changes at some point? You have to worry about that. You have to worry about longevity as well, because it feels like lately Stanislaw has been kind of bouncing around teams, if we're 100% honest. And I could kind of excuse some of the reasons why he left teams in the past, like even the more really controversial one where he left Optic for Team Liquid to be their in-game leader. Yeah, certainly one big side of it was, man, had Optic really seen out its vision yet? Because they were certainly a really strong team. I think that was like towards the end of 2016 when they won E-League Season 2 and things of that nature. And yeah, they kind of bombed that next major that they had after that. But man, was really the writing on the wall already. I mean, they had so much talent. You still had Stanislaw as a great in-game leader. I thought they could really battle through that, and they could have continued to be a good team. And it was really sad to see Stan go, especially what happened to Optic afterwards in hindsight. But it certainly did have at least a couple of things that made sense about it. You know, Team Liquid did have a lot of strong pieces. They did need an in-game leader. Stanislaw felt maybe their infrastructure and their experience in CSGO as an organization was better. You could certainly understand, okay, maybe this move makes sense. But then he immediately starts button head with Zeus, apparently loses the in-game leadership, and eventually just leaves the team altogether. Then obviously you have the whole situation with the NA Danish mix when he rejoins Optic and how that all went. Again, not sure how much Stanislaw is to blame for that, how much the Danes are to blame for that, how much the whole Optic situation in general was to blame for that, just because of the whole Infinite Esports situation and all that BS. Not sure how much value you're supposed to, throw each direction on how come that didn't work out. That doesn't work out. Then he goes over to Complexity. Certainly he put in a lot of time there. Certainly they had their moment at the Face It Major. They didn't really do much outside of that. It also did feel like Complexity, where even with all their infrastructure and funding that they had now, with the Dallas Cowboys, still did feel like they struggled to bring in additional talent to go alongside Stanislaw and Shazam to really give him more pieces he needed to make Complexity a better team. And it's not because they didn't try. I mean, Jason Lake's been very transparent about this and different stuff he said on like the podcast that they do on the Complexity YouTube channel and even just on social media, that, he tried to go get Tarek. He tried to go get these players and try to make Complexity a stronger team and could just never get it done. They also, right now, are in a coaching transition on that team, with Warden, I think, filling in for now, but that's obviously because, they didn't have Rambo anymore. I know that they were trying to go after a couple other coaches, but hadn't found one yet, and so it seems like that's temporary, but yeah, I don't know. There seemed to be certainly a rift there. Apparently there was a rift between the players and Stanislaw on a personality level when it came to just how they interacted with each other out of game. So, I do wonder, with as many times as this has happened, if you do have to pin some blame on Stanislaw, on maybe how he handles, his people skills, or, how he deals with the social aspect of being on a team, or how that all goes. I'm not really sure. I'm not going to necessarily say he does, because I don't know what's going on in these teams. I don't know what's being said behind closed doors. I can't ever know, but it does feel really weird how often these quick moves from him have happened at weird timings. So it's definitely something where you have to, because of that, worry a little bit about the long-term future, the longevity of the roster with Stanislaw on board. Not saying that's going to happen. Maybe everything goes peachy. Again, I said earlier that Stanislaw can add firepower. Maybe he can help shape up the roles better on this team if he's willing to kind of take a back seat, play the edge of the map, allow Tarek to play more aggressive positions alongside Breeze. Maybe that could make the team better. But you do have to also worry about how things could certainly go poorly, because it did seem like they were already on a positive trajectory with Tarek on board, with that still as the in-game leader. They were still getting consistent top 4 finishes. They looked like if you could just give them some time to maybe work out their map pool a bit more, either try to strengthen up their overpass or try to fix things on Inferno, since that gets played so much. If you could have given them some time to work on that a little bit, maybe have a discussion, see about how you could implement Tarek more effectively roles-wise on defaults and stuff like that. Maybe that does mean that daps needs to take a bit more of a back seat. Maybe putting Tarek in more central positions will also help him be more of a secondary caller, help do some mid-round calling. Obviously, he has some experience calling like Cloud9 back in the day, so maybe there could have been some type of situation there where that could have worked out. So, yeah, I do wonder if this move is actually going to be a good one or not. Again, it felt like NRG were already on a good path. But again, maybe Stanislaw can bring something to the table fragging-wise, and maybe he will have a vision for the team that uses Tarek better. But I do wonder what's that going to sacrifice, because Breeze already seemed to be playing really well. Ethan and Cirque were usually pretty fine. So are you going to fuck with that by bringing Stanislaw on board? Is that going to cause some problems, cause people's roles to change, which cause them to be a little bit more uncomfortable? There's definitely a balancing act that's going to have to take place here, which could either work out great and really make NRG's ceiling higher, or it could really cause them to take a stumble backwards and actually start losing some traction. So it's one of those things where, if this goes right, and this will conclude the video because I feel like I'm starting to get a little bit redundant with how I'm expressing things. If this goes right, this does indeed increase the overall skill ceiling of NRG, and could it just increase their overall potential because maybe it shapes up the roles better. So it definitely could really do wonders for this team and actually make them a stronger competitor. But what will they possibly lose, because they were already a pretty strong competitor, and they do risk losing ground because of this move, especially because of the timing of when it's happening. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with this. It's definitely an interesting move. It definitely could be great, but it could also be really, really rough. And again, there's a lot of different storylines and issues with timing that make this one really odd. But just wanted to put a video together, talk about the move, give you my thoughts, assess it a little bit. I didn't want to go too deep into the strategical side of it because I don't even know what they're going to do. That's something I'll have to assess later once I see what roles they change and how they change up their style and things of that nature. But just wanted to give you like a brief overview of it at least, and again, talk about the performance and the timing and some of the other things. So thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more content. Catch you next time.